Back in 2011, a verdict came down that just sent absolute shockwaves across America. It left millions of people asking one single question. How on earth did Caylee Anthony, a mother accused of murdering her own 2-year-old daughter, walk free? I mean, this case was a national obsession, and it was fueled by what looked like a mountain of damning evidence. So today, we're going to break down how one of the most infamous trials of this century ended in a truly stunning acquittal. And it all started with this, a frantic, absolutely chilling 911 call from Casey's own mother, Cindy. Casey's car had been found abandoned, and the smell coming from the trunk was so powerful, so unmistakable, that it set off major alarms right from the get-go. This quote from that very first call really established the grim reality of this whole investigation from day one. And yet, despite that horrifying start, despite a media frenzy that basically had her convicted before the trial even started, the jury came back with this verdict on the most serious charges: not guilty of first-degree murder, not guilty of aggravated manslaughter, not guilty of aggravated child abuse. The reaction across the country was just immediate disbelief and, frankly, outrage. So this is the central question, right? The prosecution had what looked like an open and shut case. So what happened? How did the defense manage to just dismantle it piece by piece and convince a jury that there was reasonable doubt? Let's get into it. To really understand the verdict, first, you have to understand the sheer weight of the evidence the prosecution laid out. They painted this picture of a cold, calculating mother who wanted her freedom way more than she wanted her own child. 31. That number is so important. That's how many days 2-year-old Caylee Anthony was missing. And for all 31 of those days, her mother, Casey, said nothing to the police. In fact, her behavior during that time became a massive cornerstone of the prosecution's case against her. So during that month, while her daughter was gone, Casey was living a life completely detached from a worried mother. I mean, she was out partying at nightclubs, she entered a hot body contest, and she got a new tattoo that read Bella Vita, which means the beautiful life. All the while, she was spinning this web of lies about a fictional nanny named Zanny who had supposedly kidnapped Caylee. To the public watching, her actions just screamed guilt. And then you have the forensic evidence, and each piece seemed to tell a really damning story. That smell of death in the car trunk? It was confirmed by cadaver dogs. Air samples from the trunk detected high levels of chloroform. The family computer had searches for things like chloroform and neck breaking. A single hair found in the trunk showed signs of decomposition. And finally, duct tape was found covering the mouth area of Caylee's skull when her remains were discovered. So to tie it all together, the prosecution needed a motive. And they argued that Casey, who friends said would complain about her daughter cramping her style, just wanted to escape the responsibilities of being a mom. They claimed she murdered Caylee to be free to live that party girl lifestyle, her beautiful life. Okay, so Casey was facing the death penalty. Her defense team, led by a lawyer named Jose Baez, knew they couldn't just deny all this evidence. No way. They had to offer a completely different story, a compelling alternative narrative that could create that all-important reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury. And boy, did they. The defense dropped an absolute bombshell in their opening statement. This wasn't a murder, they argued. It was a tragic accident. Caylee drowned in the family pool, and a panicked George Anthony, Casey's father, then helped her cover up the death. Now, this immediately shifted the whole narrative from a cold-blooded killer to maybe a traumatized young woman who was part of a horrible cover-up. Next, they started attacking the state's evidence, one pillar at a time. The chloroform science, they called it fantasy forensics, basically arguing it was a brand new, unproven technique. The computer searches? Well, in a stunning moment on the stand, Casey's own mother, Cindy, testified that she was the one who searched for chloroform. And the duct tape? The defense hammered home again and again that there was no DNA, no fingerprints, absolutely nothing to physically link Casey to it. But their most controversial move was turning the prosecution's key witness, Casey's own father, George, into the villain of the story. They didn't just accuse him of helping cover up the drowning, they also accused him of sexually abusing Casey as a child, which they claimed was the root of her being a pathological liar. George denied all of it, of course, but the damage to his credibility in front of the jury was done. So, with two completely different stories on the table, it all came down to the jury, and they weren't being asked if Casey was a good person or even if she was probably involved. No, they were being asked one very specific legal question. Could the prosecution prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt?
This is the highest standard of proof we have in our legal system. It means the jury has to be virtually certain. If there was any other reasonable explanation for the evidence that pointed away from her guilt, they legally had to acquit. And the defense successfully planted tons of these seeds of doubt. The medical examiner couldn't say for sure how Caylee died. There was no direct forensic link between Casey and the disposal of the body. Her parents gave conflicting testimony on the stand, and that drowning story, well, even if it wasn't proven, it offered an alternative that the jury just couldn't completely dismiss. So after a 6-week trial, the jury deliberated for less than 11 hours. I mean, that's pretty fast. One juror later said that while they felt she was probably guilty, the evidence just didn't meet that very high legal standard. Their very first vote on the murder charge was already 10-2 for acquittal. But the verdict wasn't the end of this story. Not by a long shot. The aftermath was immediate, it was chaotic, and it really left a lasting scar on the American public and the legal system. The public outrage was just immense. Petitions for something called Caylee's Law, which would make it a felony for a parent not to report a missing child, swept the nation. The media, which had really convicted her in the court of public opinion, was in an absolute frenzy. And the Anthony family, well, they just completely fractured, trading accusations publicly for years. And here's the thing about that verdict. It is final. Because of a legal principle called double jeopardy, no matter what new evidence might ever come out, Caylee Anthony can never be tried for this crime again. Legally, the case is closed. Forever. And that leaves us with the question that still haunts this whole case. The jury decided there was reasonable doubt in the prosecution's story. But, that's not the same thing as innocence. Was she a cold-blooded killer who just benefited from a brilliant legal defense? Or a pathological liar caught up in a tragedy that was way beyond her control? As we've seen, the evidence can be looked at in wildly different ways. But in all the debate, all the arguments about forensics and legal standards and media hype, it is so important to remember who was at the very center of all of this. A 2-year-old little girl named Caylee, whose death remains officially a mystery. And that, right there, is maybe the greatest tragedy of all.